Alright guys, Murph's here, and today, at viewer request, we're going to talk about a wide variety of intermediate cartridges. Now, we're not going to talk about all of the intermediate cartridges, A, because already this is going to be an incredibly long video, and B, because some of them have kind of slipped from being relevant enough to really include in this discussion. Now, some of the cartridges we're going to discuss today, I have previously covered in dedicated, there we go, that's better for, in dedicated cartridge discussion videos. So if you're interested in those, go ahead and check out the link in the description. I'll call them out as we come across them. Now, we're not going to go into what makes something an intermediate cartridge. This is something I've already covered in videos, so if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description to that particular video. Instead, we're going to look at very contextual application of these different cartridges. I do not want to spend a lot of time digging deep into data and all of this like technical stuff because first off, and quite frankly, it'll be very boring. But also, I think the contextual aspect is more important because all decisions that we make are based on a conscious trade-off. We select something based on its perceived cost and value and how that is best determined by us to be able to get the most out of what it is that we're trying to do. That's, that's why we're not all running around driving Bugatti Veyrons and stuff like that, because we can't afford them. So we have to look at the affordable options and then figure out from there what features matter most to us in order to be able to have the best vehicle that we can for the money that we're about to spend. It's the same thing whenever it is that we're evaluating processes or tactics, application of different tools and all that kind of stuff. Everything's a conscious trade-off. You got to figure out where it is that you land on that particular spectrum. A lot of people don't necessarily think about it in this way, but because a lot of people also just take others' advice. I think it's really important to critically think through what it is that you're doing. So, for example, I take a route to work that is actually a little bit longer than it needs to be, just by like a minute or two. And that's because no matter what, there's this intersection that I have to go through. This intersection is a little weird. The spacing of it, there's a dip right before you get into it. It's got a really weird yield sign at it. It's not impossible to work through. It's just a really weird setup and I don't like it. So the more efficient route to take, the faster route, it brings me directly to the intersection, then I drive through it whenever the light turns green. The route that I actually take has me come up on that intersection to where I need to make a right to where I need to go. And the right gives me a lot of options. So it allows me to turn right on red as long as no cars are coming on. It allows me to turn right with an arrow, and then it allows me to turn right on green. It gives me more opportunities to be able to pass through that particular intersection and do so more under my control. I even go that way when I go to my gym, where actually taking the route that I normally take causes me to have to go straight through that light. However, I prefer going straight through that light from that direction because I don't have as much weird stuff to contend with. There's a very large spider on my wall, and now I can't unsee that. It's tarantula season right now, and it would appear that one has found his way into my home, so I'm going to have to burn it down and start all over. It's been fun, guys. Anyway. Instead, we'll just drink whiskey about it. Ooh, that's good. Trying this out for the first time, and that is very enjoyable. Good mash. All right, so got myself all hot and bothered here. It's the same type of thing whenever it is that I talk about bringing it to a firearms example. When I talk about me overhand racking slides, I do not do so because it's some outdated belief that the only thing that matters in combat are gross motor skills. Not a belief or a theory that I subscribe to. I do so because I train with a large number of handguns, of different semi-automatic firearms. I review a wide variety of semi-automatic firearms, all of which have the slide releases in slightly different locations. With that being the case, I potentially, at competition or in training or potentially in a gunfight, could mess up where my slide release is. Now, a slide release emergency reload, the slide lock reload, is the most efficient way to go about a reload. I know this 100%. However, for my own training streamlining, I overhand rack all of my slides because the slides are all in the same location. Nobody makes a semi-automatic handgun that you can't overhand rack. Be it a Ruger Mark II or a P08 Luger, bore short pistol, doesn't matter. All of those guns will work with overhand racking. That is my conscious trade-off at that point. When we get into this intermediate cartridge discussion, process, there's also conscious trade-offs to be had. Some of these cartridges are incredibly interesting. They do very interesting, very niche things. But does it constitute all the other aspects of your conscious trade-off to be able to adopt them or to invest your time, effort, and money into them? All right, so I want to start off this discussion. And I also, before we get started, I do want to identify, guys, this is going to be a long video, I'm fairly certain, unless that spider comes over here, in which case it's going to be a very short video. The video is going to take a while, 100%, even without going into all the nitty-gritty data. If I'm taking too long through any particular portion, go ahead, go to the description, go to the chapters menu, and select where it is that you want to land on this content. Don't go away from the video just because you think I'm taking too long. I encourage you to jump ahead to things that you actually want to learn about and hear about. All right, I want to start off with a 7.62 by 3.9. Why am I starting with 7.62 by 3.9, Murph? They're cartridges that predated that fall into the intermediate category. While that is true, 7 of those cartridges, 7.62 by 3.9 is still relevant. The others have fallen into the ages. And that would be the 30 carbine, previously discussed on the channel, link in the description, and the 8mm Kurtz, or 7.92 by 33. The 7.62 by 3.9 is influenced by those cartridges, and you really see it in the shape of the 7.62 by 3.9 as opposed to the shape of the 8mm Kurtz. And, you know, the 30 carbine looking like an elongated pistol round. And this often has the 30 carbine highlighted as being a pistol round. However, it has rifle level pressures. It is effective out to 300 meters. Most pistol cartridges can't say that, but a 30 carbine can. Same with an 8mm Kurtz. The 7.62 by 3.9 is also very interesting because it transcends some terms in doctrine of the time period. What do you mean by that, Murph? What I find interesting about this cartridge was developed in 1943. It saw a little bit of action right at the end of World War II, and then, of course, became a mainstay in the USSR all the way until the fall of the Berlin Wall. The 7.62 by 3.9 was originally supposed to be a cartridge for a family of rifles: a bolt-action rifle, replacing the Mosin Nagant, a select-fire submachine gun, replacing the PPS-43 and PPS-H-41, and the SKS, being a carbine, which is supposed to replace like the Tokarev carbines or Tokarev rifles and all that kind of stuff, a semi-automatic option available. The bolt-action rifle was stillborn. It never saw mass production nor adoption. The SKS was massively produced, especially by like China and a couple of other countries. The USS, like the Soviet Union, peddled it all around its member nations, as well as around the Warsaw Pact, sending out technical data packages, tooling, experts, and all that kind of stuff to be able to establish these factories for the SKS. And it saw a lot of production, a lot of adoption, but it didn't necessarily see a lot of frontline use, except to proxy nations and proxy conflicts. It's interesting that the AK was designated initially as a submachine gun because at this time, there is not a assault rifle designation. Like that term doesn't exist. And honestly, everything that's not an LMG at a minimum is a submachine gun. So I guess if you take that terminology in that direction, that makes sense. But the AK was intended to be employed in the same manner as a PPS-H-41, as a PPS-43, in which you were establishing a wall of fire so that you can close with and destroy the enemy. Military doctrine and tactics really changed during World War II to where it's shoot and move, shoot and move, shoot and move. Fix the enemy so that your forces can maneuver against them, get to within grenade range, and then take out the pillbox, trench, whatever, with hand grenades. And you just leapfrog across the battlefield that way. Submachine guns were part of the tool to be able to do that, and to be able to generate the volume of fire along with your riflemen so that you could close with and destroy the enemy. And, the Germans did this with the MG42. Americans had the advantage of having the M1 Garand, as well as Thompsons and M3 grease guns, and so on and so forth, in order to be able to help fix and defeat the enemy. Whereas the Mauser 98K, not as effective in that same application. So that's what the AK was supposed to do, fix and destroy. And then all of a sudden they realized, well, it's in the same cartridge as the SKS. It has the same engagement envelope as the SKS. Why do we need a submachine gun designation here? Why don't we just use the AK since the SKS isn't select fire? And then we just give everyone an AK, and then we're good to go. And then we get the assault rifle term pending from that. And a lot of people like to say that assault rifle is a made-up term. It's not. It's actually a doctrinal term. It identifies an intermediate cartridge chambered weapon system that is select fire. Has the capability of being able to generate the same volume of fire as a machine gun, but generally being utilized in semi-automatic for infantry engagements and stuff like that. That is an actual term that does exist. It's overused in the media, and it is improperly used in the media, but it is a real term. And honestly, from the media standpoint, this is in no way agreeing with them. It's getting after what it is that they are saying these assault rifles are, and the AR-15 and the AK and stuff like that, and that these are weapons of war. They have no place. Blah blah blah. Not germane to the current topic. I'll get back on track here. So, the AK, getting back on track, the 7.62x39. Is one of our earliest intermediate cartridges. It's very interesting because of that. Now, this is a 122 grain to 124 grain with some outliers projectile moving at roughly 23-ish 100 feet per second. Kind of anemic, if I'm being completely honest, in comparison to everything else. You can get these up into like 150 grain and beyond, which are subsonic loads for suppressors. But for the most part, you're looking at those 120, like I mostly see 124 grain on shelves, and I hate the 124 grain loadings. I don't think they stack up nearly as well as the 122s, but that's just me and my very subjective preferencing. Now, the 7.62x39 is most frequently described as having a very rainbow-like trajectory, and that is not untrue. So most people feel that it's like a 200-meter cartridge at best, based on the limitations of the accuracy capabilities of the rifle as well as that of the cartridge. 7.62x39 is also frequently referred to as being an inaccurate cartridge, which I have a video talking about what contributes to a cartridge's inherent accuracy. If you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. While the 7.62x39 does have this rainbow-like trajectory, I have successfully engaged with a 7.62x39 out to 400 meters. Rob Ski habitually takes his out to 500 meters. So the rainbow-like trajectory is not a limitation. It is not as flat shooting as some of the options that we're going to talk about here today, and that is a reality. So what might make you want to select a 7.62x39? Honestly, every year less and less, if I'm being completely frank. The prices have been going up on 7.62x39 ammunition. It used to be that you could get it for like $8 a box. Now those days are definitely gone, and you're looking closer to, on a good day, 60 to 70 cents a round. I would be happy with 60 cents a round. I'd be very happy with 50 cents a round, but those deals are not nearly as frequent. The ammunition is not necessarily available in like a wide variety of loadings. You generally have FMJ, maybe some hollow points. It's pretty difficult to find soft points, and honestly, soft points may not run in your rifle all that well anyway. And of course, that cheaper ammunition doesn't necessarily have like great standard deviation, so you might have some difficulty out to distance depending on what it is that you're shooting. When we look at performance-wise, like, yes, I and many others have mentioned, like, oh, well, it's going to be way better at like vibe checking plates, or chipping away at somebody's cover and all that kind of stuff. But if you have proper cover, it's 18 inches thick. It's going to take a long time to get through that with 7.62x39. And as far as vibe checking plates, I mean, yeah, it's definitely going to exert a lot of energy, but I don't know, getting shot in the plate kind of deal. Like, it's not going to feel particularly good. Kind of like getting shot is getting shot. Like, no matter where it is you get shot, I inherently don't want to be shot. So it doesn't really, like, anything beyond that doesn't really matter or appeal to me. I will say that it's going to make you have to be very selective about your cover. You're not going to get away with some light stuff. The 7.62x39 is definitely going to bowl its way through things that are less than 18 inches in thickness. So I guess take that into account. But I think one of the biggest issues comes to the weapons platform. The AK naturally, the 7.62x39, I should say, has a very heavy taper to it. That's because steel-cased ammunition is the norm with that particular setup, which if you're interested in a discussion of steel-cased versus brass-cased ammunition, go ahead and check out the link in the description of that video. Brass expands and contracts with the changes in pressure in the system. Steel does not. So by having a heavy taper, it actually makes extraction easier, because you're going to have less friction as extraction begins. But that heavy taper also contributes to the extreme banana shape of AK magazines. That is why an AK uses a rock and lock. Well, part of the reason why an AK uses a rock and lock system, which is a very sturdy system, very sturdy lockup and all that kind of stuff. But it's also a very gross movements type of deal. And when you're trying to do gross movements fast and accurate, it really makes things difficult. It's that simple complexity thing that I talk about from time to time on the channel. I have lost the spider. It is gone. Somewhere around here we have Shelob. So, the issue with that is when you try to adapt the 7.62x39 to something that isn't designed for that style of magazine, say an AR-15, you wind up having to utilize proprietary magazines that almost have more of a J-like look to them in order to be able to contend with the relatively straight shot of the deeper direct insert magwell of the AR-15. This will inevitably cause feed problems because it's really probably not the optimal way to be able to present those rounds to the bolt in order to achieve like effective feeding and all that kind of stuff. So you wind up having to go with proprietary parts if you want to go with a weapon system that has better ergonomics or is perhaps situated better to be able to take modern optics, lights, lasers, all those types of things. You either have to go with the proprietary magazines, or you have to go with a proprietary lower that accommodates AK-47 mags. Take your pick. One of the things that I will point out as well that kind of gets you further down the proprietary rabbit hole is that in a standard AR-15 bolt will have to be thinned out in order to be able to accommodate the wider head stamp of the 7.62x39. So you're going to have to thin out the locking lugs and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to accommodate that. And that has contributed to increased wear over a shorter period of time with those bolts. Now, you can, of course, go with the CMMG Mutant, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description, that utilizes a proprietary AR-10 bolt, but that is a proprietary bolt that only works for that gun. It's thicker, and it's a better design, but you lose a lot of other things in going with that. So, conscious trade-off yet again. All right, guys, that was an extremely long discussion about just the 7.62x39. Why don't we go ahead and get into the 5.56? Now, I've done a lot of videos on the 5.56. I've done a lot of comparison stuff with the 5.56 in the past, all that kind of stuff. And if you're interested in the video, a cartridge discussion video, specifically about the 5.56, go ahead and check out the link in the description. The 5.56 comes in, if you're going with, like, if you're intermixing 223 ammunition, as low as 45 grains and as heavy as like 77, even up to 80 grain projectiles. When you're talking about your military loadings, you're looking at 55 to 77 grain loads, moving at roughly 3,000 feet per second, with a lot of variance because of different barrel lengths in the system. The AR-15's massive popularity has led to a barrel in every length you could possibly want for the 5.56. That does not mean all of them perform well. The advantage of the 5.56 is that this high velocity, very light projectile has a tendency to yaw upon impact with target media. And that is the bullet begins to roll and break apart and all that kind of stuff and cause like massive additional wounding capability. Not like a hollow point or a dum-dum, because those are illegal in warfare. Just as a byproduct of being a marginally stabilized projectile to begin with. Mood. So, the velocity or the yaw capability or capacity of the 5.56 is largely dependent on its velocity, which is largely dependent on its barrel length. The 5.56 was originally developed for a 20-inch barrel. That gets you the 3,000 feet per second with 55 grain ammunition, no problem. When you start dropping the barrel, you drop the distance at which you are still able to maintain effective yaw. And that's going to lead to ice picking. Now, shot is shot. If the round ice picks through or effectively yaws, doesn't really matter. Somebody's got a hole in their body that they weren't born with, and it's now leaking out the red stuff that you really want to keep inside your body, as well as whatever organs it ice picked through. So this is not ideal by any means, but it is still helpful to the overall situation, because from personal experience, I don't fight as well when I'm injured. So I definitely don't want to get injured, and I want to make sure that I'm injuring somebody else in order to be able to bring a positive resolution in my favor to the fight. The 5.56 round with it being so light, it needs the velocity. And I've talked about this before. If I don't have a lot of mass, I want to have the velocity. If I don't have a lot of velocity, then I want to have more mass. That's where the 7.62x39 comes in. More mass, less velocity. 5.56. I need to keep that velocity up because that's where I derive my wounding characteristics. However, as I go with more portable systems like a 10.3, 11.5, a 12.5, so on and so forth, I'm losing more and more of that velocity, and I'm not making it back in weight. Now, a 77 grain projectile going up from a 55 grain projectile is a 50% increase in mass. That's good. That's very helpful. That projectile also performs better at distance because with the 5.56 being such a lightweight round, it does have a tendency to get moved around by like wind and stuff like that. That's just physics at that point. As it begins to peter out on velocity, that lightweight bullet is going to shift around in crosswinds. 77 grain has a better relationship with that, as well as using it at close range. I at least now increased my mass to have a better result in my engagement. But I'm still not getting the best that I could be getting with that. And that's why like people who go with like 7.5 inch 5.56s don't make any sense to me. Because also, as I shrink the barrel, I've got all this propellant that's not being burned up. That's creating a massive muzzle flash and a lot of muzzle blast. That's not enjoyable to shoot around, especially since you're going with a shorter gun, probably for room clearing, and now you're touching off a little mini flashbang right in front of your face every time you press the trigger. That doesn't sound like a very good setup. As well as I'm not getting my velocity advantages. I'm not getting those yaw characteristics out to any form of distance. So as long as I'm working in nice and close, sure, I guess the 7.5 is effective, but there are other options that would be better in that barrel length than a 5.56. About the only reason to stick with a 5.56 in this case is that the ammunition is super plentiful, super available, relatively and pretty cheap. I mean, you can pay a little, you can pay a lot. You choose your flavor, and you have a lot of options to be able to choose from for flavors of 5.56/223, especially if you roll 223 into it as well. But seriously, where did Shelob go? All right. So that's the 5.56 trade-off, the conscious trade-off, or discussion at least. Why don't we go ahead and go into the 5.45? What is the 5.45? Well, this is Russian 5.56. So the Russians got a look at what the 5.56 was doing during Vietnam, and they decided that they would take a crack at a hyper-velocity 22 caliber intermediate cartridge. In 1975, they came out with the 5.45 load. Now, this is interesting. It's 53 to like 70-something grain projectile. They made it in like a tracer, armor piercing round, FMJ, all that kind of stuff. All the things that you would expect to see with this loading. It would earn a reputation in Afghanistan for being the poison bullet, and that being that it had a purported massive wounding effect on impact with soft flesh, taking away like legs and stuff like that. I don't know if I entirely believe that, but the round was designed with an air cavity in the nose, not a hollow point. The round is completely enclosed. There's just an air cavity, an air pocket left in the nose of the projectile, a little hollow space that deforms on impact, obviously, and kind of changes that round's association with yaw. Once again, not a dum-dum round, not a hollow point, just something that's just coming from together by design. Now, the 5.45 is kind of an instance of bad timing. It came out pretty late in the Soviet Union's lifespan. And though it became the new standard, 7.62x39 was an acceptable standard as well. And a lot of countries kind of played the fence for a little bit there, like, I don't know, I feel like your ship is sinking. And, I mean, you kind of been calling the shots for a long time, and we're kind of sick of it. So what if we just kind of drag our feet on developing a 5.45 rifle? Other countries hopped right into it. A great example being like Poland. Russia maintained the 5.45 standard loading. Ukraine had 5.45 as a standard loading, though I don't think you can call anything standard in Ukraine right now. And they're really the only ones who've continued to champion it. A lot of Eastern Europe has been going more and more towards the 5.56 as more and more of those countries are aligning with NATO, which is kind of causing the whole issue in Ukraine to begin with. The 5.45 had a brief span of popularity in the United States. 5.45 AKs are relatively plentiful and inexpensive. And 7.6 ammunition was just flying off the shelves. However, 7 and 6 would get banned, and a lot of importation restrictions, as well as the assault weapons ban, would curtail a lot of interest in the 5.45 chambered AK. So at this point, 5.45 ammunition and, more importantly, the guns chambered in it are pretty difficult to come by, actually. There's been some reintroduction of 5.45 chambered rifles, and honestly, guys, I've been able to pretty consistently find 5.45 ammunition. I can think, in 3 different states, I can think of locations where I have found 5.45. Like, a lot of people say, like, oh, you can't find it, but, like, I somehow keep stumbling on it. Like, I can think of a couple of locations right now I could go and buy 5.45 ammunition, and it's really not even that expensive in comparison to some of the other, especially in comparison to some of the options that we're going to talk about here today. Now, of course, this is a snapshot in time. Tomorrow, a whole new line of 5.45 rifles could come in, along with a super cheap ammo source, and 5.45 explodes in popularity. I think it unlikely. One of the biggest issues is you can really only find AKs chambered in 5.45. I've seen an example of one 5.45 chambered AR, and there's Aragog. What's up, dude? I can't think of what kind of mechanics went into like magazines and stuff like that in order to be able to effectively run that rifle. It sounds like not a lot of juice for the squeeze. Another one of the issues with 5.45 is the sources of ammunition available in the United States. This is something that InRange TV brought up quite a few years ago. And that was that they had a pretty much only Wolf or Tula ammunition, and there was a lot of discrepancy in the standard deviation of that ammunition. So when they were running their 2-gun action matches, and they were shooting out to 400 meters after running a couple of burn it down drills at close range, that they were having a lot of issue connecting out to that distance. That their groups, they were more or less shotgun patterning at 400 meters. So there was no consistent hole that they could find that would actually allow them to impact. The rounds kept like squirrel all over the place and all that kind of stuff. And they blamed that on just cheap, low quality ammunition. That is 100% a thing. I understand that completely. However, that does not change the fact that I actually really want a 5.45 AK. Like, quite badly. A couple years ago, I had the chance to get a Galil Ace Gen 2. However, I was out of state at the time, and the shop was being really weird about letting me buy it and send it to my FFL back home. So they just let the sale stagnate, and I went and bought a Zastava M70 instead. Which, I mean, I don't have any regrets there. But I was that close to a 5.45. Like, I need a Krinkhoff. Not because Krinkhoff is good, but because Pierce Brosnan in Goldfinger. Excuse me. GoldenEye. Yeah. Goldfinger was way before Pierce Brosnan. But GoldenEye. Like, excellent. Excellent movie. Excellent, depiction of that weapon system. Even though, Murph, that's like an 8.3-inch barrel, and you were just complaining about 7.5-inch ARs. The heart wants what the heart wants. Like right now, the heart wants more bourbon. All right, so that's the 5.45. Why don't we go ahead and talk about, since we're on the subject of AKs, and one of the things that I love about AKs is that Russia has literally built an AK for everything that you want. Krinkhoff, if you want short AK. Romania built the PSL in case you want long range AK. You have the 5.45 if you want, Russian 5.56 AK. There are 5.56 AKs out there if you want ammunition commonality with weapons that you already have. And then you have the 9x39 for quiet AK and the VSS and Val Venturez systems. I'm a huge fan of this just because I want one, because I think the Val is super neat. But I did a comparison video between 300 Blackout, 8.6 Blackout, and the 9x39. And of those cartridges, the 9x39 is probably the most underwhelming because it is so niche. Would I say that you should go with the 9x39 over a 300 Blackout? Absolutely not. But if you're looking for a vibe, a 9x39 Val setup would be pretty mint. Just saying. And that's really all we're going to talk about with the 9x39 because it's not terribly available in the United States. It's out there. But finding the ammunition and a gun to shoot it is going to be quite the ask. Can't wait for that to not be the case anymore, but we are not there yet. Okay, what about the 300 Blackout, since we're on the subject of suppressed setups? The 300 Blackout is a 223 case, bored out to 30 caliber. This is one of the great things, because a lot of the stuff that we talk about that will go into an AR-15 has wider case heads than the 5.56, but the 300 Blackout doesn't, so we can use the standard 5.56 bolt. Everything else is going to have those same thinned out lugs as the 7.62 by 3.9 bolts. Something to keep in mind with there as we move forward in this conversation. So the 300 Blackout generally comes in loads as low as 90 grains, as high as 220. It's more common to see like 110 to 220. So you have subs and you have your supers. Most people talk about 300 Blackout and espouse its values as a suppressor host with those 150 and up subsonic loads, and I don't disagree with that. I'm not saying that that is not one of the great advantages of the 300 Blackout. But what I think is often forgot in the discussion of the 300 Blackout is I think it is the superior choice in the AR-15 platform for an SBR, because it's using pistol powder and it burns within 9.5 inches of barrel. Which, if you're interested in more in-depth discussion on 300 Blackout, go ahead and check out the link in the description to the video I did on it. So, with all the propellant being burned in 9.5 inches of barrel, you can go with some pretty short setups, which is, of course, advantageous for suppressors, because suppressors are, 4, 6, 8 inches long. So, you add that to a 9.5 inch barrel, and you're not losing that much space, as opposed to adding it to like a 16-inch gun. I have zero interest in a suppressor on a 16-inch gun. I got a big old block way out in front of me, terrible bounce point on the rifle. It's now, 22 inches long. Why would I do that? On a 9.5 inch setup, it makes a lot of sense. Even if you go shorter, you're still getting more powder burn than you would out of a 5.56. It's just like people are like, oh, well, why would you go less than 9.5 inches? It's just the automatic talking point is, oh, well, it burns up all this powder 9.5 inches. Like, dude, do you own a 16-inch AR? Same deal. You're taking suboptimal powder burn, a little bit more muzzle flash, a little less velocity in order to be able to have a more compact rifle. 10.3, same kind of deal. With the 300 Blackout, I have a 6.5 inch Splenda Gerbil build, my little SBR, which if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description of the video. That thing is so tiny. And it has some muzzle flash to it, but not nearly as much as I would with a 5.56 in the same length. So putting 125 grain projectiles in a 6.5 inch 300 Blackout SBR gives me mass, doesn't lose me that much velocity. That's a good trade-off as opposed to going with a shorter 5.56 round. Something to consider. Now, of course, 300 Blackouts actually managed to stick around pretty decently. And while I will not say that it's as prolific as like 5.56 or 9mm, every shop that sells ammunition sells 5.56 and 9mm. But if it's a well-stocked place, they'll have 300 Blackout kicking around as well. You might just have to do a little bit more searching. So a 30 cal AR-15 with no added weight, being able to be pretty short and light, that has a lot of tangible benefits to it. And I can understand someone being interested in that. I mean, because I am. Okay, that's 300 Blackout. Why don't we get into a lot of cartridges that were meant to replace the 5.56. In the early 2000s, like the start of GWAT and stuff like that, there are a lot of, I would consider them to be anecdotal reports of the 5.56 performing suboptimally in combat. Now, some of that might be, not appreciating the fact that, like, hey, I'm running a Mark 18 and I'm shooting at a guy 300 meters away and he doesn't seem to be going down like he should. And also, you got somebody hopped up on something, they may not necessarily even go down at close range. There's a lot of complaints that, like, well, these guys that were shooting, these Taliban guys, these guys in like Iraq and stuff like that, they're pretty skinny. The rounds are kind of like punching right through and not really getting a lot of yaw. And I mean, that's a thing, but you'll pretty much have that with any rifle round. So there were several cartridges that were developed to replace, or at least have a shot at replacing, the 5.56. The first one we're talking about is the 6.5 Grendel. Now, I have some notes here because I'm not as intimately familiar with the 6.5 with a lot of these options as I am. Are more standard stuff like the 5.56, 308, so on and so forth. This would be a 90 to 130 grain projectile moving at 2,400 to 2,800 feet per second. Heavily dependent on barrel length. You could find this out to like 22 inches long, but with the higher mass, kind of like what we were talking about with the Mark II 6.2 loads, the 77 grain projectiles in the 5.56, as I diminish that mass, as I diminish that barrel length, I at least have mass take over. This is a good relationship. Okay, I'm losing velocity, but I'm maintaining the same mass. I have more surface, I have more destruction occurring against my opponent. In addition to that, it's a 6.5 millimeter projectile, which, as typical, are characterized by having long, slender projectiles, good ballistic efficiency, good ballistic coefficients, good aerodynamics and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to maintain a flatter shooting trajectory. So it's a round that performs well at distance and performs just fine close up. Well, that kind of sounds like having your cake and eat it too. Now, of course, this is a much fatter cartridge than the 5.56, which means that you have diminished capacity in AR-15 mags, which it will fit into. So you're talking about like 26 rounds. If there had been enough interest, I'm sure, or there probably was enough interest, and somebody did make 30-round mags for it, if you're really dead set on 30 rounds being like your magic number, which I think in a military sense, you would probably see that. This cartridge is often purported to have remained supersonic out to 1,000 meters and having like good energy and all that kind of stuff to, you know, rival the 308 in performance. Yeah, 6.1 half a dozen other in that particular context. You have to be able to see something out to 1,000 meters. And if you're talking about like replacing a main battle rifle, like an M16A2, you're probably not looking at running 6.5. You're probably not looking at having something set up to shoot to 1,000 as much as like something probably expected to engage out to 300. It seems as though interest in the 6.5 Grendel has waned, but not disappeared entirely. The ammunition's definitely gone up. It's looking like over $1 a round at this point, but it is available. It is out there, and the guns are still out there. I was actually looking at doing a 6.5 Grendel build for my Mark 12 inspired build, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. But it was 2020, and when I looked around to see if there was any ammunition in stock, I found nothing, and I knew of nothing locally to be able to supply ammunition for it. So it's like, I'm not going to build a gun that I can't shoot. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So instead, I chambered in 5.56 because I had a steady line on 5.56. All throughout the pandemic, I had a steady line on ammunition, and I was paying better than market value on most of that ammunition. Not all, but most. And I was definitely paying more than I wanted. Okay. That's the 6.5 Grendel. What about the 6.8 SPC? Now, this is a .277 caliber projectile, which came in, if I remember correctly, 85 to 120 grain loads. Yep, 85 to 120 grains, moving at 2,500 to 3,000 feet per second, of course, dependent on barrel length. The 6.8 is interesting because, like, we see a 6.8 right now is presently slotted to replace the 5.56, but this being the 6.8 by 51, which is basically just a 270 caliber 308 with way higher pressures. The 6.8 saw some mild adoption, and the biggest adoption I can think of for the 6.8 is that the Saudi Royal Guard bought like 1,800 specific PDW-sized rifles and a bunch of ammunition, but that's the only like notable adoption that I can think of. It's not an uninteresting cartridge. It's doing a lot of the same stuff the 6.5 Grendel is close up. However, it drops behind the 6.5 Grendel, quite literally, at 400 meters. You start to have a massive drop in trajectory after 400 meters with the 6.8. And it doesn't have nearly as ballistically effective of a shape. Yeah, it's carrying more mass, so it's the same mass versus velocity conversation that we had previously, but very dependent on barrel length. And while the 6.8 hasn't gone away entirely, it has really struggled in keeping up with the 6.5 Grendel. There's a lot of discussion out there as to which is preferred. There's a lot of people on either side, but I hear a lot more people talking about the Grendel than the SPC, or the SPC2, which was a change in like twist rate and the shape of the chamber and stuff like that to better take advantage of the projectiles that were being used. So the 6.8 SPC is kind of on the back burner for most people. Something to keep in mind, guys, like, yes, these rounds were developed. There were rifles that were developed for these rounds. These rifles possibly went into competitions for adoption and stuff like that with different organizations, police units, military units, blah, 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 blah. And some of them maybe even got adopted. Some of those manufacturers might have received a contract, but they were relatively small contracts. And they've not been significant enough of a presence anywhere to have changed anything. So it's important to ground this conversation in that topic. Now, moving away from like military replacement of the 5.56, let's talk about some cartridges that came out that were more or less marketed as just being better versions of available options for the 5.56, like the 224 Valkyrie. You guys remember the 224 Valkyrie? It was kind of like a little blip on the radar. It popped up and then disappeared just as quickly. This is a hot-rodded 5.56. So we're talking about projectiles in the 60 to 90 grain range, moving from 2,600 to 3,400 feet per second. It's a longer, more slender projectile. It's a fatter cartridge casing. This is considered to have been kind of rushed to market and maybe not gotten all of the development that it needed before being released onto the market. So the early production of the ammunition ran into a lot of issues with stabilization. Some rounds were unmaking themselves in the bore and you were just projecting a big old cloud of trash downrange. And there was a lot of issues with accuracy. Now, these were built, like the 224 Valkyrie was pretty much running like 18-inch guns, so like Mark 12 type setups. And you're looking for precision at that point. And these types of precision guys that would be interested in a proprietary round like the 224 Valkyrie are not going to be okay with anything but sub-MOA, consistent sub-MOA, if not sub-half MOA accuracy. Otherwise, why are they wasting their time? So with that being the case, the 224 Valkyrie quickly found itself on the outs. Now, I see the occasional box of ammunition and stuff like that. It's not completely dead, and I'm sure QC has gotten better, but with like COVID and stuff like that, that really set back a lot of your kind of niche rounds at that point. We're definitely getting into niche rounds. And with that, we'll end off on the 6mm ARC. Now, the 6mm ARC has gained a lot of attention here lately because Grand Thumb did a video on it, and now everybody wants a 6mm ARC, or everyone wants to talk about the 6 ARC. My interest in the round has more or less remained steady. I don't have one. I'm not opposed to getting one. I just haven't. All right, so this is a just over 100 grain round. So like 103 to 108. There's like some 105, 107 grain loadings out there and stuff like that. Moving at 2,700 to 2,800 feet per second. Now this is a 6mm round, which also has a very similar shape to the 6.5. So long, slender bullets, pretty skinny, and not at an insignificant weight. So it's kind of like throwing little tiny javelins downrange. Ballistic capability, very similar to that as a 243, but in a combat style rifle. And while I feel like this round was really designed for long range, it would have some benefits as a close range cartridge, just being heavier than the 5.56. So like if I had this in a 12.5 setup, I would feel potentially more confident than I would with a 5.56 and a 12.5 setup. Now, ammunition availability and cost still favors the 5.56 in this case, but slender projectile, flatter shooting trajectory, good ballistic coefficient, good energy and stuff like that on target. The 6mm ARC really does bring in a lot of interest, and especially when you talk about it as a long-range cartridge. 6mm cartridges have been burning up the precision world for years. So for there to be a mainstream offering that has these types of, that brings those advantages to production rifles, that's pretty interesting. Production rifles. I can't think of anybody who's actually producing a 6 ARC as much as people are producing barrels. Like I don't think like Colt has a 6 ARC or Spikes has a 6 ARC as much as, you know, probably Ballistic Advantage is producing 6 ARC barrels. And hopefully more credible manufacturers as well. All right, guys, this was a long haul, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me as long as you have, however long that may be. I appreciate the views, I appreciate the comments, I appreciate any interaction I have with this channel, because I'm just a guy who really likes guns, and I like talking about them with like-minded people. I hope you guys found this interesting. That's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.